That's right, Daniel Ricciardo is back on the full-time Formula One grid. Nyck De Vries has been dropped from his AlphaTauri seat and will be replaced by the 8-time Grand Prix winner Daniel Ricciardo from the Hungarian Grand Prix in a couple of weeks' time. This is absolutely huge news, not only for Nyck De Vries and Daniel Ricciardo, but may also affect another driver on the grid too, as the Honey Badger looks to bite back. But before we delve into Daniel Ricciardo and how he's managed to get back into a Formula One seat after just 10 Grand Prix away from the sport, I do want to acknowledge Nyck De Vries, as although I have been critical of him, and we all know and we've all seen that the step up into Formula One seemed to be a step too far for him, he did manage to make it. Being in Formula One for however long puts you in a very prestigious club that I, and most probably you, will never be in, and although his time in Formula One won't be remembered overly positively, he did still win Formula 2 and Formula E, so there is a driver there, and I hope he manages to find himself a seat in another series where he can once again thrive in the future. Back to the main talking point in Daniel Ricciardo though, and his return to the grid, it's not completely out of the blue. After being ejected from the McLaren team at the end of last season, after 2 years in Papaya, the Australian slotted straight back into a testing role with his old team Red Bull for the 2023 season. I remember at first Daniel Ricciardo was very casual about the whole thing when he was discussing getting back into Formula One. Like, I even remember him saying, I'm still at a point where it's not at any cost. It's not just to get back on the grid. A lot of the reason for taking this year off was that I didn't want to just jump back into a car, any car, just to be one of the Formula One drivers. But as the season has progressed, we've actually seen him hovering around the Red Bull garages a lot more than most were expecting. Of course, he joined the team for the Australian Grand Prix. That was always going to happen. But beyond that, he's actually been involved in show car runs of old Red Bulls, seat fittings at Grand Prix, and he's been spotted frequently on the pit wall for Red Bull too. So even though at first he said he wanted to use this year to work on himself, after just a few months away, that seems to have completely changed. And he even said recently, I do feel like there's certainly some unfinished business. I'm staying in the loop and I'm staying prepared. And everything he's done this season and everything he's been building towards seemed to come to fruition today when Daniel Ricciardo finally got to drive the 2023 RB19 at Silverstone in a Pirelli tyre test for Red Bull. It's something Ricciardo and Red Bull have taken incredibly seriously, as both the team and the driver have been talking about this for weeks now. Horner said it's an important test for Pirelli, but it's also going to be great to see him back in a Red Bull car and see where he's at, both on pace and mentally, physically, and get his feedback on this car as well. And I feel like it's just come at the perfect time. Outside of Max Verstappen, there's been a real dip in form from the Red Bull drivers on the grid, and with Nyck De Vries given an ultimatum a few races ago after reports from Helmut Marko that Christian Horner never even wanted him in the first place, Daniel getting to show his pace at Silverstone was an amazing opportunity for the Australian, which he has massively taken. Even before he got back in the car, Horner was full of praise for Ricciardo's efforts on the simulator ahead of his first on-track test, calling him extremely competitive and saying there's a spring coming back in his step, and then he turned the simulator pace into on-track performance, so much so that the team have seen what they could be having instead of Nyck De Vries, and they've opted to put him back in a Formula One racing seat. Like, not even during the summer break, they were like, we just need to get him back in a seat right now. I think it also helps that not only is Danny Ric looking quick, but AlphaTauri are going through a tough time at the moment too. The team is changing names next year and facilities. Franz Tost is also going to be moving on, and they're firmly rooted to the bottom of the constructors' standings, despite Yuki Tsunoda having a decent start to the season. If you think about it, a rejuvenated Daniel Ricciardo is exactly the kind of personality that can spark a little bit of joy back into this team, whilst also having the experience and know-how to guide the team towards hopefully some more competitive weekends too. Tost explained this decision by saying there's no doubt about his driving skill, and he already knows many of us, so his integration will be easy and straightforward. The team will also profit a lot from his experience, as he is an 8-time Formula One Grand Prix winner. Now, I am very, very happy for both Daniel Ricciardo and AlphaTauri, as I think on a sporting level, it will help them both move in a positive direction for the rest of the season, and on a fan level, Daniel Ricciardo is one of the most infectious personalities on the grid, and will add a lot of fun on and off the track. One thing that did also catch my eye though, is how Red Bull described Daniel's move as going on loan to AlphaTauri for the remainder of the 2023 season. Now, I know that that is the right terminology, as he is still signed as the third driver at Red Bull, and still has that contract for the remainder of the season, but the word loan also made me think about the likelihood of Ricciardo heading back to Red Bull in place of a certain Sergio Perez. As I said before, all of the Red Bull drivers outside of Max have been up and down over the last few races, and Sergio Perez is being discussed constantly at the moment. Like, he is struggling. He has failed to make Q3 5 races in a row now. That's Monaco, Spain, Canada, Austria, and the UK, where the Mexican has not been inside the top 10. And then, to make it even worse, Max Verstappen has started all of those races comfortably in the top 10, because he's been on pole position every single one of them. Plus, there seemed to be a little bit of a turn from the Red Bull team recently in how they discuss Sergio Perez to the media, especially in Austria. It was clear that the Red Bull team is starting to become maybe just a little bit frustrated with Perez. Previously, the team just kind of shrugged off Checo's underachievements and often came up with little excuses for him, which defended him from any real pressure, but that started to wane a little. Now, Christian Horner has said it would be stupid to suggest that Sergio Perez could be replaced, especially considering he is under contract for not only this season, but also for next season at Red Bull. But Christian Horner also said that there was no plan to replace Nyck De Vries fairly recently, and look how that worked out. In reality, right now, Sergio Perez doesn't need replacing. He's still second in the championship, mainly thanks to the rest of the field swapping around so much in recent weeks, and the team are incredibly comfortable in the constructors, thanks to Max Verstappen just winning everything. But I think Ricciardo will have seen the cracks that are starting to form, and maybe the worry from Red Bull as to what happens if the other cars do start catching Max, and all of a sudden next year looks to be a lot more competitive. I think the Australian could be eyeing up that second Red Bull slot. So he's taken this AlphaTauri seat for the rest of the 2023 season with that second Red Bull seat in his sights, and as a chance to prove to Red Bull that the underperforming at McLaren doesn't reflect what he can still actually give in the sport. If he performs well against Yuki Tsunoda by being quicker than the Japanese driver more often than not, it will go a long way to showing that Ricciardo can still deliver and can be that driver for Red Bull that he once was in the past. Let me know what you think. Are you happy to see Ricciardo back on the Formula 1 grid? What do you think that he can actually achieve in that AlphaTauri car? And if you enjoyed this one, I also released a video about Ricciardo's old team McLaren after their incredible Silverstone Grand Prix, so click that link and I'll see you over there.